Here's Stephen Colbert on the Supreme Court's court jester.
Justice Scalia was a little more nuanced in his criticism, writing that if he ever joined an opinion that began the way Justice Kennedy's majority decision did, quote, I would hide my head in a bag. I could have sworn he was already hiding his head in a flesh-toned cinch sack. Please come on my show, sir.
With Justice Scalia sounding more like the Donald Trump of the Supreme Court every day, today the Supreme Court ended its term and issued a 5-4 decision ruling that drugs with unpredictable effects can be used in death penalty cases, and that those drugs do not violate the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Slate's Dahlia Lithwick, who was in the courtroom today, writes this about Justice Scalia's oral statement. Since no written summary of his statement was provided, you will need to take my word for it that what he read deviated from his written concurrence in some really odd ways. And while I don't want to spend too much more time on Scalia acting oddly, this was very odd. He opened his statement, which seemed not to have been written down, and didn't really track his written opinion with, last Friday, 5 justices of this court took the issue of same-sex marriage away from the voters based on their policy preferences, and then noted that today 2 justices sought to do that again with the call to abolish the death penalty. In case you were wondering, he isn't over Obergefell. Joining us now, Linda Greenhouse, journalist in residence at Yale Law School and a former New York Times Supreme Court reporter, and Emily Bazelon, senior writer, scholar in law at Yale Law School and a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine. Emily, from where I sit, judicial scholarship aside, Scalia is proving himself to be a terrible writer. I mean, these are just terrible bits that he's sticking into these opinions, and terrible thinker. And they're combined. You know, in that wacky reference he made the other day to, just ask the next hippie you run into, as if that can explain American society today. What's going on with this guy?
Well, I agree that Scalia has gone over the top in these end-of-term opinions. I am going to stick up for him as a writer, however. He uses rhetorical excess and flourish to enormous effect.
I mean, this is where we're just going to have a stylistic disagreement. Yes, he does that, and I think all of his choices in that territory lately are bad.
He gets his point across, though, and he gets quoted. He gets attention, which is clearly one of the things that he's after. And also, aside from the rhetorical excess, he does make his point clear along the way. He knows how to build an argument.
Linda Greenhouse, what's your reaction to what has become of Justice Scalia in the last few days?
So my reaction, Lawrence, is that, beyond the court jester stuff and the rhetoric stuff, here's a man who's approaching 80 years old. He's been on the Supreme Court for a long time, and he has failed. His project has failed. He's failed to persuade his fellow justices to adopt his view of constitutional interpretation, so-called originalism. I mean, look at the marriage decision. That has nothing to do with originalism. He's failed to persuade his fellow justices to accept his view of interpreting statutes. Look at the health care decision from last week, which he dissented, that rejected his view of statutes. And, if you're really going to list the accomplishments of Justice Antonin Scalia, they're very few and far between. Beyond the Second Amendment, I actually can't think of any. So, he's angry, and I understand that, but I don't think he's doing himself, his legacy, or the Supreme Court any good with this kind of nonsensical talk.
Yeah, I mean, Emily, if you compare any 800 words of Scalia lately to any op-ed piece by George Will. I mean, Will is an elegant writer. You can disagree with him as much as you want, but he's an elegant writer. The word choice is careful. He's deliberated on it. It's rare that you get a hunk of George Will that you say, boy, that really sounds silly. I mean, it isn't that hard for a Supreme Court justice with clerks working for him to come out with opinions that read well.
Well, Linda, as always, is right about the way in which I think Scalia is doing a disservice to his own legacy and perhaps to the court. And I think she's also right that he's revealing a deep frustration about the turn that this term has taken, other major decisions, and the whole mode of interpreting the Constitution that he has supported has really gone by the wayside.